All right, this is a problem we didn't have time to finish in class, so I want to finish this up via podcast. But here we're trying to figure out the height of that shape, or object, which I think in our book was a water tower. We have these angles of elevation up here. We know this distance is x, and this is another 50 feet. And so I think it's helpful to draw out the two separate triangles. So this one is just xy, and then that angle. This one is y, and then this is x plus 50 with that angle. And so I want to draw those. Right now we're doing right triangles, so later in the class we'll have another trick up our sleeve, but for right now this is all we know. Hypotenuse isn't anything we care about or want to know, so those guys aren't useful at all. We don't want to know it, and we don't even have enough information to get that. So we're stuck with tangent. So then we can set up our two problems. Tangent for this one, 19.9 degrees. Opposite over adjacent, and for this one, tangent of 21.8 equals opposite over adjacent. All right, I personally like to just put ones under these guys and cross multiply to simplify. Later, that just when we get into problems where the variable's on the denominator, usually that helps students, so it's kind of what I tend to do. All right, now if A equals B and A equals C, then A has to equal C. So we have kind of a substitution here where the y is the same on both sides. So obviously these guys have to be equal. So I'm going to write an equation using the substitution. And there we go. All right, now to solve this. At this point, if you absolutely hate messing with the tangent of 19.9 degrees and tangent of 21.8, you could go ahead and convert those to decimals. Now, the only thing is in math, if you round during the process and round at the end, you're going to have a huge margin of error. So if you're going to round these, you need to round it to probably 5 or 6 decimal places, and then carry all those decimal places through the process. And then at the end, if you round to the nearest tenth, your error isn't going to be, it's not going to affect the tenths position. So if you want to convert them to decimals at this point and, do the distributive property and then bring your x's to one side, numbers to the other, and then get a value for x, that is totally fine to me. Just make sure that you use a lot of decimal places, so when you round to the tenths, that's not impacted. Now I'm going to do it more the way math people would probably do it. So we tend to just round at the end. So we're going to just distribute that the way it is. And we know that the tangent of 19.9 degrees is a number. I mean, it's going to be a ratio. But we're going to wait till the very end of the problem to, do the calculation. So I'm going to leave those as is. In algebra, to solve something, we want the x's on one side, numeric values on the other. So I want to get rid of that guy. These guys cancel. Now, I can't really subtract these because they're not like terms. Yeah, they have the coefficient in common, but they're different tangent values. So I'm just stuck writing them down. All right, so if the goal in algebra is to get an x, to isolate the x, and you're like, but I can't collect like terms, what am I going to do? Well, you're actually going to factor that x out. So I can take that x out from both by factoring, which is just the distributive property backwards. All right. And so then my last step to isolate my x is to divide by that quantity. So I'm just going to go ahead. Now, if you do it this way, then your big issue is at the end here, typing it in your calculator correctly so you don't screw up. So you hate to do all that algebra, right, and then have your calculator issue at the end. So if I'm going to type this in my calculator, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in parentheses to group my numerator. And some calculators, this has to be in parentheses too. I think that's automatic on a lot. So you're going to have parentheses, 50 tangent. It wants to know the angle, and usually that's in parentheses. And then another parentheses to end it. And then you're going to hit your divide sign. And then in the denominator, you're going to have a parenthesis to group your denominator. Usually your calculator wants a parenthesis around that. Minus tangent, again, usually there's parenthesis around that. And then a final parenthesis to end the denominator. If you're not super great with your calculator, what you might want to do is just type in your numerator, get an answer, type in the denominator, get an answer, and then divide those two. Either way, I got for x something around there. All right, and so that's my x value, which again, I don't really care about. So I want to go back and solve for y. I really want to know how tall this object is. In this case, it was a water tower for us. So you're going to pick one of your equations to solve it for, to sub x in to solve for y. This one's a little more complicated, so I'm actually going to go back to this one. It's just a little easier. So I'm going to take this value and sub it in right there for x, and then multiply by the tangent of 21.8. And when I do that, I get approximately this many feet. Okay, and I'm just rounding to the nearest whole number. Again, you're still going to get that answer if you way back when would have converted this to a decimal, actually further back. Before right here, if you would have converted this to a decimal with 5 decimal places, distributed, had this converted to a ratio in 5 decimal places, and just brought x's to one side, numbers to the other, and divided, you're going to get this accurate to the nearest whole number. And again, in story problems, they tend to be more algebraic, and a numeric answer is usually what we want, where if it's more of a traditional trig problem, we tend to like perfect answers like, radical 3/2 and things like that. So on these, converting to a decimal is not going to be an issue.